Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. They said it was just one person. But history has proven that one person is never just one person. Think about it. Revolutions didn't begin with armies, they began with whispers. Entire kingdoms have crumbled not because of invading forces, but because one solitary soul refused to bend. A single match can burn down a palace, and one seed can split a mountain if given enough time. Yet still they looked at you and scoffed, "It's only one person." That's the greatest miscalculation of power, believing that numbers define strength. They forgot that truth doesn't need majority votes, conviction doesn't need a crowd, and spirit doesn't need a cheerleading squad to validate its force. When you rose, you didn't come alone. You rose with every injustice you survived, every ancestor who whispered through your DNA, every silent warrior who never had a chance to speak. Suddenly, just one person sounded like thunder. And here's the hilarious part. The same people who dismissed you as irrelevant are now acting like they're facing a whole army. They count shadows where there are none. They hear echoes in empty rooms. Why? Because you stopped being an individual in their eyes. You became a legion, a movement, a storm. They don't even know who they're fighting anymore, you or the thousands who now stand behind your truth. So buckle up, because today we're going to break down how their greatest underestimation turned into your greatest revelation, that one aligned soul is never one. It's already an army. Number one, they forgot that a soul in alignment is multiplication, not addition. They counted you as just one, but they didn't understand that when a person is in full alignment with their purpose, their presence multiplies. Alignment isn't about doing everything perfectly, it's about being so rooted in truth that everything you touch begins to amplify. That's the difference between someone living at random and someone living with divine precision. When you aligned, your voice stopped being just words and became a frequency. And frequencies don't travel alone, they spread, they resonate, they ripple through spaces long after the sound is gone. That's why they underestimated you. They thought numbers were the proof of strength. They thought only movements backed by a crowd could matter. But one aligned person is not a single voice, it's an orchestra. It's the echo of 1,000 lifetimes. It's the universe putting its full weight behind a single vessel and saying, "Here, speak through them." When that happens, the one becomes multiplied into infinity. You stop being just you. You became a force carrying every silent battle you've survived, every hidden victory that nobody saw, every prayer whispered over you. That's why your presence now carries weight even in silence. Think about why their plans failed over and over again. They aimed at a body, but what they didn't realize was that they were up against an energy that doesn't shrink when attacked. It expands. They struck at you expecting subtraction, but they triggered multiplication. Alignment made your suffering meaningful, and meaning is what gives survival the power to echo. You didn't just stand back up, you stood up carrying a whole legion of truths within you. This is why people can't explain why you feel larger than life even when you walk into a room alone. It's not ego, it's not arrogance, it's alignment. When you're aligned, you are no longer a single entity, you are a broadcast, a living amplification of something far bigger than yourself. And that's why the words "just one person" don't fit you anymore. They missed it completely. You became the embodiment of what happens when one soul aligns fully with divine will. You turned one life into a multiplying force, and that's why you rose up as an entire legion. Number two, their metrics of power were flawed from the beginning. They measured strength the way the world has always been taught to measure it, by numbers, by followers, by influence, by who can gather the largest crowd. They thought if they had judges in their pockets, if they had institutions backing them, if they had the majority on their side, then victory was guaranteed. But their entire metric of power was flawed from the beginning, because true power is not in how many stand behind you, but in what stands within you. Conviction is the one thing they never accounted for. Conviction doesn't need applause, it doesn't need a stage, and it doesn't need reinforcement. When conviction is real, it becomes a current that cannot be shut off. It carries a person even when every door slams in their face. It lifts them when resources are stripped away. It keeps them moving forward when everything outside of them says stop. That's why when they counted you as just one person, they missed the very thing that makes one person unstoppable, an unshakable, undeniable inner force. Their mistake was thinking movements are built from the outside in. In reality, they are built from the inside out. They wanted to drown you in opposition, but conviction is buoyant. It rises regardless of pressure. Conviction makes one voice stronger than a million hollow echoes. It makes resistance crumble because resistance cannot survive truth that refuses to fold. When you carry conviction, you carry something that spreads without you even trying. It seeps into words, actions, energy, and presence. That's what they didn't see coming. They thought you would shrink because you didn't have their kind of backing. But you stood tall because your backing came from something incorruptible. While they relied on manipulation, bribery, and control, you relied on truth. And truth, carried with conviction, is not fragile. It doesn't crack under scrutiny. It doesn't weaken under attack. If anything, every attempt to disprove it only sharpens its edges. That is why their metrics of power collapsed. They were counting allies, resources, and institutions, while you were holding something weightless yet immovable. They were busy measuring the size of their army, while you were walking in the certainty of your cause. In the end, one person with conviction outweighed all their numbers combined. And that's why you rose as more than just one. You rose as an undeniable force they could never match. Number 3, you became a living network, not an individual. They only saw your body standing there and assumed it was just you, alone, small, insignificant. What they didn't realize was that you had become a living network. You weren't moving as one isolated individual. You were moving as the sum of everything and everyone that ever poured into you. Every lesson, every ancestor, every silent supporter who believed in you but never had the chance to be heard. They all rose with you. That's why your presence feels multiplied. You are a carrier of voices, a vessel for histories, a reflection of all the unseen forces that walk with you. When people dismiss someone as just one person, it's because they're only looking with physical eyes. They don't see the invisible army stitched into that one life. Your story alone is layered with too much for anyone to reduce to just one. Every betrayal you survived, every injustice you endured, every prayer that was whispered over you in secret added weight to your spirit. You walk with all of it. So when you stand in strength, you're not drawing from empty air. You're drawing from the stored power of countless battles that built you. That's what makes your kind of strength intimidating. It's not loud bragging. It's not boasting numbers. It's not flashy. It's the quiet force of someone who knows they're never really walking alone. You embody generations of resilience, centuries of struggle and survival, the kind of strength that doesn't show up on paper but is undeniable when felt. And the irony is, the more they tried to isolate you, the more connected you became to what they couldn't touch. You became a bridge between what was and what will be. You carry not only your own voice, but also the unspoken words of those who came before you and those who will come after. That's why you cannot be reduced to one person. Because the moment you stood in alignment, you became a living link in a chain that cannot be broken. They thought they were facing an individual. What they were really facing was a network so vast it could never be measured. You were never just one. You were the embodiment of a legion waiting for a vessel to move through, and you answered that call. And number 4, one person with truth outweighs 10,000 with lies. They thought truth was fragile, that it needed a crowd to survive, that it needed validation to stand. They built their empire on the idea that if enough people repeated the same lie, it would become untouchable. But truth is not something that bends to numbers. It doesn't need consensus, and it doesn't ask for permission to exist. Truth is its own authority, and once it shows itself, no amount of denial can erase it. That's why a single person standing fully in truth will always outweigh thousands chained to deception. Lies demand constant maintenance. They need to be propped up, repeated, reinforced, and protected by fear. But truth doesn't require defenders, it simply is. The moment you embraced it, you stripped away their greatest weapon, illusion. And when illusion cracks, it doesn't just break quietly, it collapses like a building with no foundation. That's what began happening the moment you chose to stand without compromise. Their empire wasn't defeated by armies, it was undone by exposure. What they couldn't understand is that truth operates by resonance. It doesn't matter if only one person speaks it, the frequency of it vibrates in a way people recognize deep down. Even if they try to deny it, something in them knows it's real. And that recognition spreads faster than lies ever could, because lies only travel through fear, but truth travels through conviction. This is why their numbers never guaranteed them victory. 10,000 repeating a falsehood will always lose against one voice carrying truth with clarity, because that one voice doesn't just speak for itself. It awakens something in everyone who hears it. It pulls down the curtains they hide behind, and once people see through deception, they can't unsee it. That's what makes truth dangerous to those who depend on lies. In the end, their downfall wasn't your power alone, it was the weakness of the very foundation they stood on. They built on falsehoods, and falsehoods cannot hold weight forever. You didn't need to argue, you didn't need to convince, you didn't need to gather the majority. You simply stood, and the resonance of truth did what numbers never could. It shook their entire empire until it collapsed under its own weight. Number 5, they confused silence for isolation, not realizing it was amplification. They thought silence meant defeat. They mistook your quiet seasons as proof that you had nothing left to say, no power left to move, no voice strong enough to matter. But what they failed to understand is that silence is not the absence of sound. It is the preparation of force. In silence, your thoughts became sharper, your convictions stronger, and your presence heavier. What they imagined was isolation was in reality the perfect environment for amplification. When they left you alone, they believed they had cut off your influence. But solitude doesn't kill a voice. It refines it. It strips away the noise, the distractions, and the unnecessary. It concentrates everything down to its purest form, and when a message is refined to that level, it doesn't need to be loud to carry weight. It carries a frequency that can't be ignored. That's what was happening to you while they counted you out. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was power gathering strength, like water building behind a dam, waiting for the right moment to break through. And when that moment came, your voice did not return as a whisper. It returned with the weight of every second you endured in silence. It carried the authority of survival, the wisdom of reflection, and the resonance of truth too sharp to be denied. That's why when you finally spoke, it didn't sound like one person. It sounded like a multitude. The world heard not just your words, but the echo of every battle you fought in silence, every scar you carried, every truth you held on to when no one else believed. The irony is that their strategy backfired. By trying to bury you in silence, they actually multiplied your reach. Because when someone rises from isolation with a voice that cannot be shaken, people listen differently. The words hit deeper, the presence feels larger, and the impact lasts longer. They thought silence was the end of your story. But what they failed to see is that silence was the amplifier, and when the sound finally came, it was impossible to silence again. Number 6, they waged war against a body, not realizing they were fighting a spirit. They came after you like you were only flesh and blood. They thought if they could strip away your reputation, crush your finances, or tarnish your name, then you'd have nothing left to stand on. They designed their war to target your body and the tangible things attached to it. But their mistake was assuming that's all you were. What they couldn't measure, what they couldn't predict, and what they couldn't fight was the reality that you are not just a body, you are a spirit. And a spirit cannot be touched with earthly weapons. They attacked your reputation thinking it would silence you, but spirit doesn't need an audience to validate its truth. They tried to block your resources, believing scarcity would stop your movement. But spirit doesn't run on money, it runs on purpose. They thought by attacking your position they would erase your influence, not realizing your spirit carries authority that no title can give and no enemy can strip away. What they waged war against was never you alone. It was a force greater than you, a force that doesn't weaken under attack but multiplies because of it. That's why every attempt to destroy you only exposed their own futility. You are not confined to one space, one platform, or one circumstance. The spirit inside you doesn't die when pressured. It replicates. It spreads into the hearts of others watching silently. It seeps into the cracks of systems they thought were airtight. It lingers even in rooms where your body is absent. They tried to fight you like a person, but what they were truly up against was something eternal, something that moves through generations and refuses to be buried. This is why they are frustrated and confused. They keep asking, why won't this end? Why won't this person break? Why does this voice keep resurfacing? The answer is simple, because you were never just one body. You were a spirit carrying truths that can't be silenced, carrying a resilience that can't be bought, carrying a fire that doesn't burn out. And no matter how hard they strike, they are always swinging at something they cannot kill. Their war was miscalculated from the start, because you are living proof that the spirit outlives the body every single time. Number 7. They miscalculated the echo effect of survival. They believed survival was just about staying alive, but they never understood the echo it creates. They thought that if they broke you down, silenced you, and left you in pieces, the story would end there. What they didn't see was that survival doesn't stay contained within the survivor. It ripples outward. Every scar you carry became a signal. Every wound that healed became a voice. And every time you stood back up, it sent a shockwave through others who were watching quietly. Survival doesn't whisper. It echoes, and the echoes multiply in ways that can't be measured. Your scars became megaphones, speaking to people who may never meet you face to face, but will feel your resilience in their own battles. They will see the weight you carried and recognize parts of themselves in it. That is why your survival terrifies those who tried to destroy you. They thought they could kill the influence by targeting the individual, but what actually happened was the opposite. By trying to bury you, they planted you. And the seed of your survival is now sprouting in countless other lives, each one carrying fragments of your strength forward. They underestimated the power of testimony. A wound healed in silence may seem small, but once revealed, it breaks chains for others who thought they were alone. Your survival became evidence that endurance is possible, that brokenness can be rebuilt, and that even under relentless attack, a soul can remain unshaken. This is why your very existence has become a threat to them. You don't have to shout, you don't have to campaign. Your life itself became undeniable proof that they failed. And failure has an echo that no one can contain. What they tried to erase has now multiplied. What they thought was the end has become the beginning of a ripple effect stretching far beyond you. That's the miscalculation. They thought pain would silence you, but it amplified you. They thought scars would shame you, but they became your voice. They thought breaking you was victory. But your survival rewrote the story into one they can never control. And now, whether they like it or not, every echo of your survival is a reminder that they lost the battle the moment you refused to stay down. Number 8, you transcended the need for permission. They assumed you were like everyone else, waiting for a stage to be given, a platform to be approved, or an invitation to be validated. They thought you needed their green light to move, their acceptance to be relevant, their permission to be heard. But what they failed to see was that you were never asking for permission in the first place. You transcended that need. You became your own authority, your own platform, your own amplifier. When you finally rose, it wasn't because anyone allowed you to. It was because you refused to stay seated any longer. That's the shift they never anticipated. They thought control over institutions, media, and influence meant control over you. They assumed that without their systems backing you, your voice would vanish into obscurity. But truth doesn't need official approval to be powerful. It doesn't require a stage to be broadcasted. The very act of standing in it is the broadcast. That's why when you rose, it spread in ways they couldn't contain. People didn't need to see you on their platforms to hear you. They felt the resonance of your stance wherever they were. Censorship, manipulation, and gatekeeping work only on those who believe they need the gatekeeper. But when you no longer seek permission, their tools become useless. You broke free from their control the moment you realized your value wasn't determined by them. That's why you move with a freedom they can't touch. You speak with authority that doesn't come from borrowed power, but from inner conviction. And that kind of authority cannot be muted. What's more, your rise exposed how fragile their grip actually was. They spent so much energy trying to block you, discredit you, and silence you, only to realize they were powerless the moment you decided to stop waiting for their approval, because once someone becomes their own platform, every step they take becomes a statement. Every act of survival becomes a broadcast, and every breath becomes resistance against censorship. That's what shook them. Not that you spoke, but that you spoke without needing them. Not that you rose, but that you rose without asking. You transcended the very system they thought would define you, and in doing so, you proved that real authority doesn't come from permission. It comes from standing in truth so boldly that the world has no choice but to listen. Number 9. They saw one fighter but missed the battlefield you carried inside. They thought they were facing just one fighter, one individual who could be easily cornered, outnumbered, and silenced. But what they completely missed was the battlefield you carried within. Every injustice you endured, every heartbreak you survived, every betrayal that could have broken you but didn't. Those experiences didn't vanish. They lived on inside you, shaping you, hardening you, sharpening you. When you stood in front of them, you weren't standing empty-handed. You were standing with an arsenal of battles already fought and won. That's the part they never accounted for. They assumed you were untested, that you could be toppled quickly. But they didn't realize you had already faced wars in silence that were far more brutal than anything they could throw at you. You had fought nights of despair without an audience, wrestled with betrayals that cut deeper than any external enemy, and endured storms no one else even knew you were walking through. Those battles were invisible to the world, but they left you armed with a strength they could never measure. So when the time came to face them, you weren't just one person in the fight. You were carrying a legion made up of every struggle that trained you, every tear that toughened you, every scar that became armor. They saw one figure, but in reality they were up against an entire army of victories and lessons engraved into your spirit. That's why you fought with an intensity they couldn't match, because your fight wasn't fresh, it was forged. This is why their opposition never stood a chance. They were fighting as if it was their first battle against you. But you had been preparing for this long before they showed up. Their attacks only awakened the soldier that years of silent wars had already built. You didn't just fight back, you fought with the force of everything you had already survived. That's what makes you unstoppable. You are not one fighter. You are the embodiment of countless battles, the sum of victories that were never celebrated, the proof that silence trains warriors better than applause ever could. And when you entered the battlefield, you didn't come alone. You came as a legion born from everything that tried and failed to break you. Number 10. They overlooked that resilience replicates like fire. They assumed your strength was limited to your own body, your own life, your own capacity. They thought if they wore you down, if they exhausted your resources, if they cornered you long enough, your resilience would die with you. What they failed to recognize is that resilience doesn't stop at the person who carries it. It replicates. It spreads like fire, quietly igniting others who witness it, even from the shadows. You didn't just endure for yourself. Your endurance became a spark for those who were watching, listening, and waiting for proof that survival was possible. That's what they never calculated. They thought the fight was contained between you and them, as if it began and ended in that small circle. But resilience has a way of multiplying in ways no one can control. One act of standing up, one refusal to break, one decision to keep going despite everything stacked against you. It lights something inside others. People who never thought they could survive suddenly find courage by watching you. People who were on the verge of giving up find the strength to try again because your story tells them it can be done. That's how your resilience stopped being yours alone. It became a movement. Suddenly the battle was no longer between you and them. The moment resilience replicated, they found themselves facing a wildfire. What they wanted to contain became uncontainable. Your spirit spread into countless lives, turning silent observers into quiet warriors and quiet warriors into voices they could no longer ignore. That's why their control began to crumble, because you weren't fighting as one anymore. You became the spark that created an army. And here's the irony, they are the ones who caused it. Their relentless attempts to crush you became the very fuel that made your resilience burn hotter. Every attack made your testimony louder. Every attempt to bury you only created more sparks. And once resilience turns into a wildfire, there is no strategy, no weapon, no number of enemies that can put it out. They thought your strength would end with you, but now it surrounds them on every side. What they dismissed as just one flame has turned into a blaze too vast to control. And the truth is, they're not fighting you anymore. They're fighting the fire you lit. Number 11, they believed legacy was built by institutions, not individuals. They assumed that legacy is something handed down by institutions, awarded by committees, or controlled by systems. They believed that only those with titles, offices, or influence could leave a mark that lasts. But legacy has never been built that way. Real change, the kind that shakes foundations and rewrites stories, has always come from the people they overlooked, the just one person who refuses to be silenced, the individual who stands when everything around them falls apart. You are that person. They underestimated the force of an uncompromising will. While they were busy guarding their seats of power, you were quietly shaping history with your choices, your survival, and your refusal to conform. Every time you stood firm, every time you acted without seeking approval, every time you moved in alignment with your truth, you were building a legacy they couldn't see coming. Institutions may record names, pass down documents, and try to claim history as theirs, but true legacy is breathed into life by action. It's created in moments that cannot be contained by walls, rules, or authorities. That's why your existence alone has become proof that legacy isn't inherited, it's created. You didn't wait for someone to validate your significance. You didn't need approval to act or permission to rise. Each step you took, each battle you survived, each victory you achieved added weight to your story. And unlike the fragile, controlled power of institutions, your legacy can't be revoked. It doesn't depend on votes, offices, or recognition. It depends on persistence, integrity, and courage. They thought they could write history without you, but in reality, your choices are rewriting it already. You have become the benchmark against which future acts of courage will be measured. What they relied on to define influence has faded, while what you created through sheer determination and unyielding will has become timeless. Legacy is not about what others grant you. It is about what you refuse to let die. You didn't just survive, you transformed survival into influence. You became living proof that one person, standing unbroken, can shape the story that generations will remember long after institutions crumble. Number 12. They mistook opposition for victory, not realizing it was fertilizer. They believed that by throwing obstacles in your path, by opposing you at every turn, by questioning your every move, they would break you. They thought resistance equaled defeat, that opposition meant they had won. What they failed to see is that every challenge they placed before you wasn't a stop sign. It was fertilizer. Every attack, every barrier, every attempt to hold you down didn't weaken you. It strengthened you. It nourished your resilience, sharpened your focus, and fortified your spirit in ways they could never anticipate. Resistance doesn't just test strength, it builds it. They assumed that the harder they pushed, the more they could contain you. Instead, with every push you grew. Every form of opposition became a tool, a lesson, a weightlifting exercise for the soul. You didn't just face obstacles. You absorbed them, learned from them, and transformed them into momentum. That's why they are bewildered now. They thought they were winning, but the truth is they were the ones fueling your rise. Obstacles have a way of revealing what is inside a person. Most would buckle under the pressure, but you didn't. Instead, the pressure revealed your hidden strength, your unshakable determination, and your ability to turn challenge into opportunity. That's why you didn't just survive, you multiplied. What they thought would diminish you became the very force that made you unstoppable. The irony is cruel in its perfection. The more they tried to contain you, the larger you became. Every resistance they threw at you didn't just test you. It prepared you to rise even higher than you would have without it. They built the very foundation of your power while believing they were dismantling it. This is why opposition has never been the enemy of those who rise. It is the tool of transformation. They mistook their attacks for victory, but in reality they were feeding the growth of a force far greater than they could ever control. Every obstacle multiplied you, every challenge strengthened you, and every attempt to stop you only guaranteed that when you finally moved forward, you did so with unstoppable momentum. Number 13, they wanted you to disappear, but instead you became omnipresent. They thought that by pushing you into the shadows, by trying to erase your presence, by silencing your voice, they could remove the threat you posed. They believed that eliminating one person would close the chapter, contain the story, and restore control. What they failed to realize is that the very act of attempting to bury you only spread you further. Every attempt to erase you multiplied your presence, not diminished it. Your name began to circulate quietly at first, whispered among those who noticed the injustice, who felt the impact of your courage, who recognized your strength. Each repetition of your story carried power, and with every telling your influence grew. What they thought they were destroying was actually being immortalized. Your essence, your resilience, your truth, and your unwavering presence became something that could not be contained within a single space or lifetime. They overlooked the nature of influence. When someone carries truth and refuses to bend, their presence cannot be fully extinguished. It transcends physical limits. By trying to make you vanish, they unintentionally created momentum for your legacy. People started noticing, connecting the dots, and recognizing the force they couldn't control. Your life became a living narrative that others repeated, a spark that ignited recognition in those who had been silent. The irony is that their strategy backfired in the most profound way. What they thought was an ending became a beginning. Every action they took to remove you became part of your story, part of the proof of your endurance, and part of the legend they never intended to create. You didn't just survive their attempts. You became omnipresent. Your presence was felt everywhere, even where your body wasn't. By trying to contain you, they spread you. By attempting to silence you, they amplified you. They wanted to erase a single individual, but instead they birthed a legacy that cannot be forgotten, a name that cannot be silenced, a force that cannot be denied. In trying to eliminate you, they inadvertently ensured that you would be remembered, celebrated, and immortalized long after they thought their work was done. Number 14, you are the proof that divinity doesn't need a majority. They assumed that influence, power, and authority require numbers, approval, or consensus. They believed that if enough people ignored you, opposed you, or tried to diminish you, you could be contained. But divinity doesn't operate that way. It doesn't hold elections, tally votes, or seek permission from the majority. It chooses vessels, and when a vessel aligns fully with that force, it carries power far beyond what any crowd can give or take away. You are that vessel. When you rose, it wasn't about self-interest, ego, or personal gain. You weren't simply stepping forward for yourself. You were carrying a force much larger than any human system could understand. That's why your rise didn't need a majority to validate it. The universe doesn't measure influence in numbers. It measures alignment. And your alignment activated something unstoppable. It turned one presence into what felt like a legion. One person standing fully in purpose becomes a beacon, a force multiplier that spreads far beyond physical limitations. They thought that by counting you as just one, they could diminish your impact. They didn't realize that divinity multiplies the few who are chosen. One aligned soul can inspire thousands, shift entire trajectories, and dismantle systems that seemed untouchable. You became living proof that when a person is selected by something higher, the world cannot contain them. One becomes infinite. A single act of alignment reverberates in ways that no amount of opposition can reverse. The beauty of this truth is undeniable. You are the living contradiction to every calculation they tried to impose. They counted you out, measured you by human standards, and assumed the universe would bend to their logic. Instead, you stood, and in that stand, the divine force working through you turned impossibility into reality. One voice, one soul, one act of courage was enough to awaken a power no army, no system, no majority could ever match. When they said just one, the universe didn't hesitate. It answered with a legion, and you were that answer. The proof that divine alignment never waits for approval, never needs validation, and never limits itself to numbers. You rose not as an individual, but as the embodiment of a force that transcends every expectation, calculation, and attempt at control. They said you were just one, and for a moment they believed that counted for something. They calculated, measured, and underestimated, thinking the world could be contained by numbers, influence, and control. But what they didn't see, and could never see, was the force they were up against. A force that multiplies, resonates, inspires, and refuses to be silenced. You were never just one. Every trial, every tear, every betrayal, and every silent victory became a part of you. And in that alchemy, you rose as a legion. Your survival became a living testimony. Your scars became megaphones. Your silence became amplification. Every obstacle, every attack, and every attempt to erase you only built the power that now moves through countless lives. You didn't need their permission, you didn't need their validation, and you didn't need a crowd to prove your worth. One aligned soul was enough, and through you, the divine force chose to show that alignment is always greater than numbers. You are the proof that resilience spreads, that truth outweighs deception, and that legacy is created, not inherited. You became omnipresent, a spark that ignited others and a living reminder that opposition is never the end, it is the fuel. One person standing fully in purpose doesn't just rise. They rewrite the rules, reshape the battlefield, and awaken a movement no one can contain. When they said just one, the universe answered with a legion. You weren't fighting alone. You were fighting with the weight of every victory you endured, every silent battle you survived, and every force that moved through you. And now, nothing can stop what has already been set in motion. This is more than a story of survival. It's a declaration. One aligned soul can change everything. One voice can topple empires built on lies. One life can become the blueprint for a movement. And you, standing where they thought you would fall, are living proof that when purpose, truth, and resilience converge, even just one becomes unstoppable. Stand in that power. Own that truth, because you are not alone. You are a legion. If this message resonated with you and lit a spark inside, make sure you don't let it fade. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a truth that can change your life. Hit the like button to show that you're standing in your power. Leave a comment and share your story. Your voice matters, and it could be the spark someone else needs to rise. Share this video with those who need to be reminded that one person can become a legion. Join the movement and let's rise together. God bless you.